Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the RDA US hosted webinar series highlighting RDA outputs. My name is Stephanie Hagstrom. I'm Director of Community Development at the Research Data Alliance US and the host of today's webinar. Before we get started with this presentation today, I have just a bit of information I wanted to give for those of you who are not familiar with RDA or those that have been around but may not know the structure, and some webinar housekeeping reviews. So first of all, get to my next slide, if I can get over here. The Research Data Alliance, which is also called RDA, is a community of over 12,000 data experts from 146 countries around the globe who collaborate together and build social and technical bridges to enable open sharing and reuse of data. Members of the RDA come together through self-formed focused working groups and exploratory interest groups to exchange knowledge and discoveries, discuss barriers and potential solutions, define policies and test standards. Many of the 90 active groups have produced outputs to enhance and facilitate global data sharing and reuse. The RDA also has 30 national groups that support initiatives of the members of those regions and provide a platform for those regions to interact on a global level. There are 4 regional groups of the RDA that provide resources to support and sustain the RDA global operations. The RDA US, the host of today's webinar, is one of those recognized regions and is represented by 2,600 members who help strengthen the data science infrastructure community. So during today's webinar, we're pleased to include translation of this webinar from English to French. And you should see a globe on your control panel. And if you'd like to listen to this in French, please hop on over there. We're also recording this presentation, both in English and in French. And when these recordings are ready, we will add a link to the recordings from the RDA website webinar page, and the slides will also be uploaded to that page. We have allotted time at the end of the webinar for questions. There will be 3 ways for you to interact with our presenter today. If you'd like to speak, you may select raise hand, and there is an option for me to unmute you and you can ask the question directly. You can also add your questions to the Q&A section, which you will see in your Zoom control panel, or you can add to the chat, although we would prefer the Q&A than trying to scroll through chat. But if chat's more comfortable for you, I will find it. So Jennifer and I will both be monitoring these areas. If for some reason there's more questions than available time, I will transfer those unanswered questions to a document and send you the answers after I give them to Jennifer. And okay, that's all I have for housekeeping. So I am pleased to welcome back Jennifer Gibson, who will present part 2 of the webinar that she presented in October, How to Get Attention for Research Project Outputs. Jennifer resides in the United Kingdom, so there's a few of you dialing in from the UK here this morning. My morning, your night. And she's an open research advocate with experience engaging faculty, funders, librarians, administrators, and others in new research practices. She recently became the executive director of Dryad, a nonprofit community-based open data curation and publishing platform. Prior to joining Dryad, Jennifer was head of open research communication and founding head of marketing and communication for eLife, which is an open access journal for biomedical and life sciences. She was also director of, prior to that, programs and operations for SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resource Coalition, and she is the chair of the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association, OASPA. I am pleased to turn the mic over to Jennifer to share her screen and get going. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming back.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, for having and for organizing. Okay. So Stephanie, you can see my screen all right? It's the right size this time?
I can.
Okay, great. And Zoom has conveniently placed your images on top, so super. Thanks everyone behind the scenes for pulling together this event. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. I'd like to shout out to my colleagues in Canada and at the Alliance doing the interpretation behind the scenes. I actually picked up the topic we're going to be talking about today, social marketing, while I was working at Health Canada in Ottawa. So there's a long tradition of social marketing in the National Capital Region and a strong Quebec representation in social marketing too. François Lagarde is the expert there. So really great to have you folks here. As Stephanie said, this is the second webinar discussing how to get attention for RDA research project outputs. We conceived of the first webinar as the support to the chairs and working groups within RDA, but the material is relevant to anyone really working with faculty, administrators, students, teaching research, policymakers, to talk about research communication, research practice, reproducibility. The theme that I'm going to come back to again and again this morning is open research, because as Stephanie said, that's my own experience. What we have in common here is that we're all trying to increase the impact of our work by getting attention from stakeholders. So we may be trying to perpetuate data citation, we may be trying to convince folks to deposit with our institutional repository or use our open access fund. All of these things are about engaging with the administrators and faculty and students on campus and adjacent to campus. So I hope that you're able to take some applicable lessons from the discussion today. What we're talking about is social marketing. So I'm going to revisit a little of the presentation from the last webinar, because it's foundational. It's really the context for what we're talking about. And I hope you're not put off by the term marketing. It's been adapted. Commercial marketing principles have been stolen and repurposed for the benefit of society. So again, back to those folks in Ottawa and Quebec in the 90s, where I worked with them, they were world leaders in adapting commercial marketing principles to promoting public health in Canada, to promoting a vaccination against measles, to helping people to know how to wear a bicycle helmet properly. And they were experienced veterans from the commercial marketing and advertising domain who were using their talents to promote the public good and health in Canada. So this is an established thing, and I picked it up again with these folks in the 90s at Health Canada. And when I started to work with Spark in 2005, it really struck me that this is what we're doing here. We're using marketing and community building, community engagement practices to perpetuate open research behaviors, practices, and behaviors. So only recently have I managed to pull together this program to make my case and to explain how we're using commercial marketing practices to advance open research, as I've been doing personally for the last 17 years or so. Yeah. So there is a long tradition in health promotion. I think there have been some writings with respect to social marketing in open research and open science. I need to consult those myself, and I will do that before we revisit the course at the Force 11 Scholarly Communication Institute. So I first pulled all of this together for a summer course in 2021, which Stephanie attended, and which has just been accepted for presentation again this summer. So if you want the full package, please consider signing up. Okay, so a little bit more about social marketing. Before I presented at the course at Force 11, I consulted one of the modern social marketing luminaries, John Drummond, who works out of corporate culture, I think, in the UK. And he helped me just to refresh my thinking again, because it had been some time since I thought formally about social marketing. And he reminded me that social marketing is about impact. First of all, that's the difference between commercial marketing and social marketing. We're trying to have an impact, and that it begins with journey planning. It begins with thinking about the experience of our intended audience, and at what point we can intervene in their journey to encourage them to do something differently. So the diagram to the left is from Kramer and Bozeman. It is probably familiar to you, and it describes the researcher journey. And I believe that the intent of this diagram was to describe innovations in scholarly communication some years ago. So I'm looking at the outside of the circle here, the stages of research. We've got analysis, writing, publication, outreach, assessment, and discovery. Please ignore the inner bits, but I figure you're probably familiar, so it won't be too distracting for you. Social marketing begins with looking for friction, looking for opportunities to stop a behavior that we don't want to see happen anymore, and opportunities to perpetuate a behavior that we do want folks to take on. So, for example, if the behavior is that we want the researcher to consider an open access publication rather than a subscription access publication, then we may approach them at the end of the writing stage, or we may approach them at the beginning of the writing stage, so that they're thinking ahead before the story is complete and packaged and ready to go. Similarly, if we're encouraging folks to adopt data citation, we may approach them at the point of writing, when they're pulling together their reference list, and invite them to consider whose data they pulled in and to cite that formally. Or perhaps even smarter for us would be to go before the analysis stage and to get them thinking about whose work they're pulling in, how they're going to reference that, and encourage them to include it in their reference list. So I think this is familiar material to a lot of you. I encourage you to think about your work and the interventions that you're advocating for as we approach the rest of this conversation. Brian Nozick's framework for behavior change is really, really handy here. So again, you may be familiar with it. It's on the left-hand side, the pyramid. He talks about how in order to change behaviors in research, we need to build, first of all, the systems that make it possible. So create the infrastructure. Digital repositories are an excellent example of that. If we want faculty to make all of their work openly available, then delivering systems that help to make that happen is a necessary step. Similarly, making it easy through user interface and the experience, so that folks lean in and want to do it again and aren't put off by the experience of interacting with that system, is another essential step, as is building communities of practice around these behaviors, incentivizing and sometimes invoking policy. So these are the types of interventions I think that are social marketing. You know, we have conceived of all of these things. I bet that everyone in the room is involved in one form of intervention described here or another. But then the next step is then communicating. It's about taking the message, the behavior change, the intervention to the stakeholder community that we have in mind, and then invoking all of our commercial marketing practices. So this is a marketing plan that I have on screen for you now. We'll call it an outreach program, because sometimes the marketing language is alien to us. So an outreach program is much broader than what we have time to talk about in this webinar or in the last webinar. It's many different stages. With our last discussion, which is recorded, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to take a look, because when Stephanie asked me to prepare the webinar, she asked me to consider what is the most important thing, you know, what is the most impactful thing we could take from the FISCI course and package into a 45-minute webinar, and that's it. It's really about knowing the audience that you're about to engage with. So do go back on that if you're able. The focus of today's discussion is selecting the tactics. It's selecting the channels, the avenues, the methods, the approaches that we're going to use to approach our intended audiences. But because I feel that the material in the first session is so important, I'm just going to revisit it really, really quickly. So the three foundational components of your outreach plan are segmenting your audience into the relevant parts, choosing which aspects of that audience, which subgroups of your audience you're going to prioritize, and then framing your offering in a way that makes sense to them in their language. So so imagine the universe of people that you could be approaching is vast, right? It's global, it's multidisciplinary, it's multi-stakeholder. So breaking that down, first of all, into different groups of characteristics that make sense to you and what you have to do. So you may want to differentiate based on geography and say, I'm going to speak to a Canadian audience now, and I'll speak to the Ugandan audience at a different time, that your audience approaches things differently based on geography. Or if you're working with researchers and faculty, you may want to differentiate between early, mid, and late career stage folks, because they approach things differently. So segmentation is about honing in on those characteristics and then setting them apart and into their more homogeneous groups. Targeting is simply that. It's deciding which segments of your audience are you going to prioritize. So we certainly want to reach everyone in the world. I know that we do, but our marketing program, our outreach program, is just going to be so much more effective if we prioritize, if we focus on individual groups at a time and communicate it with language and with messages that matter to them. So you may prioritize 5 out of 20 groups at a time, but I'd like to emphasize that you don't want to go for everybody all at once, because there's a high risk that your message is just going to become too diluted to be effective. And then finally, on that point, the framing statement, known in commercial marketing as your positioning statement, is about setting out what you have to offer in a way that makes sense to your intended audience. So you must put yourself in their shoes. You must think about why citing data is important to them, why publishing their protocols is important to them, how is it going to benefit them ultimately, and then further framing statement puts your offering, your program, in contrast with another. So it could be competitive, why you should put your protocols here and not there, or it could be inaction. Why publishing your protocols is important as opposed to not publishing your protocols. So I hope that my examples are useful as I go through. There's a wide group here, and I know we're involved in a lot of different types of work and trying to hit different segments. I hope that something resonates with the work that you're trying to do. So again, I encourage you to go back on that discussion if and when you have the time, as I feel it is the most important thing around building your marketing program. What we're going to talk about today are the tactics. So this is what I mean by tactics. It's press, social media, influencer, sales, advertising. Every time I have a marketing job to do, I go through this list in my head and I say, which things are going to work here? Given the audience that I've just decided to prioritize, I think about, how am I going to reach them? What is the most effective thing? So before I move on, let's just take a moment, and could you just ask yourself, what is the most important audience that you have to speak to right now? If you had to choose just one, is it students? Is it faculty in neuroscience? Is it the university librarians? Who is it? And you can pop that in the chat if you'd like, but I'd just like you to bear it in mind while we move forward. Okay, so with each tactic now, I'm going to describe what I mean, and then I'm going to offer a few suggestions for how to use it, given my experience in scholar communication and stakeholder engagement. As you use this type of stuff and you get more comfortable with it, make it your own. This is kind of textbook stuff that I picked up at business school a long time ago, and then I kind of mushed it into my own version of reality here. So I hope that it's useful to you. And again, given the stakeholders and work that we have in front of us, I hope that it is. But as you become more conversant, adapt it. This is nothing written in stone at all. So when I talk about press, What I mean is the media. So the media can involve consumer media, like the Guardian in the UK, trade media, so consumer media speaking to individuals and consumers, trade media being channels that we consult as professionals, so Times Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed in the US. Society journals and newsletters are a form of media or press. They're keeping an eye out for news to cover, to communicate to their communities. And some of the ways I suggest working with this group include sending press releases. So you know, when using the media, think of your own experience. Think about what you read in the news and how significant it is. So you don't want to send a press release about something that doesn't rise to that level, that doesn't have impact in the local community or the national community. But in the event that you do have something that rises to the right level, you could send a press release, and a press release, as you know, is a formal thing that presents the message in a formal way. It talks about the impact and communicates that you feel that this thing is worth a press release. Similarly, you can contact your press contacts with an email brief just to make sure that they're aware of what's happened. It's important that we not cry wolf too much. You know, if the press are quite sensitive to what's coming into their inboxes, and if you send them too many messages that aren't relevant to them, then they may shut you down, which is partially why relationship building is very, very important with the press. So, you know, there are people who follow scholarly communication and open access. There is a steady stream of content in The Guardian. So if you're able to build a relationship with these journalists, it could really help you to get reach into the channels that they represent. Press conferences are a great way. Again, it's something that we use sparingly. It's for something, you know, events that really have significant impact for the community of press that you have to reach. And they're often in person. You bring everybody into a room together. You have an expert available to the press to help fill out the story. So I've used press conferences to announce major new studies. So when a new species of human was announced, so that, you know, involved press conferences in South Africa in parallel within London. And I think with introduction of congressional bills, there have been press conferences. So it's not beyond the realm of the work that we do. It's just something you want to think quite carefully about how to use. And finally, maybe not finally, we've got custom built lists, which is, you know, creating an email list of contacts that you have carefully nurtured and with whom you communicate about different types of announcements that you make. And broadcast services are not custom built. You may be familiar with PR Newswire and Associated Press that carry messages around the world about global developments. They will sometimes carry news about research and changes in research policy that we work on. And there's also a service called Eureka Alert, which is hosted by the AAAS and carries science and research news. So I'm going to do one more of these tactics, and then I'll pause for breath. So social media is something that's no doubt familiar to you. I should have differentiated between social marketing and social media. So the term social marketing precedes social media by a few decades. So it's not the same thing. Social marketing is about having social impact, and social media, as you know, is something different. So when I talk about social media, what I mean is, you know, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, some of the newer stuff that I haven't used at all myself, Snapchat, TikTok, Clubhouse, and listservs. I would include listservs here because of the nature of social media. So in my experience, listservs remain heavily used by the library community, very, very important for communicating with the library community. And there are some research communities that have listservs. The thing about all of these types of social media is that they are owned by the communities that run them, right? So it's user driven. and it's a kind of peer-to-peer communication. So it's more difficult to penetrate if you're not a part of that community. It's not impossible to do, but it's something where you want to aim to maintain a peer-to-peer voice and communicate information that's relevant to them in their language. So becoming part of the fabric to emphasize why what you have to offer is important to them. Oh, I'm going to skip that point, actually, never mind. So going back to the point of why it's important to understand your audience before you consider your tactics, I'm going to use my husband and my daughter for you. So Paul is over 50. He's British and he lives in London. And his information consumption involves reading all the papers. So these, he's on the Guardian, he's on the Daily Mail, and he's in the sports section of the Sun every day. He doesn't use Twitter. He sees no purpose for Twitter. So if I want to communicate with a person like Paul, I'm not going to use Twitter. The flip side is little Mia. So, Mia's not yet 20. She's American, living in Edinburgh. And I offer these other demographics and characteristics because it may well change your strategy. So if you're trying to raise attention for, institutional repository in Chicago, then, you're not prioritizing folks in Edinburgh. So that a geographic segmentation is one way to separate the people that you're not interested in. Mia does read the papers, but she only checks for the important headlines, and she spends more of her time on Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok. So if you're looking for an audience that fits more of Mia's description, then you might be looking at those social media channels instead of the traditional media that someone like Paul is consuming. So I'm looking forward to discussion and hearing how this resonates with your own work and what questions you may have. I'm motoring through a little bit here because I want to get through all 7 tactics and try to bring it together a little bit for you in hopes that you'll be able to take this away and make use of it in your day jobs. So with respect to influencers, I don't mean YouTube influencers. I don't have any experience with YouTube influencers. Again, given the nature of our work, I've not had any use for that. But that doesn't mean to say it can't and shouldn't be done at some point in future. Generally speaking, what I mean by influencer is someone who's known and respected amongst the community that you're trying to nurture, and they're someone who's willing to serve as your advocate or your champion. So launching the eLife journal. eLife is an open access journal and project to transform science publishing, where I think Stephanie said I worked before, starting out from scratch, having Randy Sheckman, a soon-to-be Nobel Prize winner, and Fiona Watt and Detlef Weigel carry the flag for the journal from the beginning was critical. It was critical. They were the editors, and they were responsible for shaping the scope of the journal. But the fact that those influencers were driving the initiative was pivotal, essential. And these influencers add credibility to your cause. So when you don't have a Nobel Prize winner as editor-in-chief of your initiative, you still might ask that Nobel Prize winner to speak for you. And the ways in which they may get involve include being quoted. So if you're sending an email or a press release or a peer-to-peer campaign, they may agree to be quoted. They may also agree to send emails on your behalf. So we can borrow their identity with their permission and send messages to their colleagues in their name if they approve the message, or they may agree to send something on your behalf to their networks. The 80-20 rule, I think, is useful to bear in mind. It's something I've only just learned about, and it suggests that if you've got 100% of people to try and go after, if you prioritize the 20% influencers, then they may help get you to 100% by virtue of their influence, because the other 80% are watching what they do. So I think that's an interesting strategy for working with influencers. Direct marketing now is the use of email or traditional mail to reach your audience's inbox. So less and less use. In 2012, I was orchestrating some extensive postal mail campaigns and personalizing things that were landing on the desks of department heads. There was a lot of work there. And then since then, in the last 10 years or so, I've used a lot of email campaigns, and I could talk for another hour about building strong email campaigns, but we're just not doing it anymore. Email, I think GDPR has done a lot to limit our use of email. Respecting people's privacy concerns means that they must explicitly opt in to lists where they receive email from us, and at least in the UK and Europe, but it also governs American institutions that work with the UK and Europe. So that's been a dampening factor. And then, the post, even before the pandemic, we just weren't using it that much anymore, and not in the academic research community. So if you do feel you want to take up direct marketing, it's important to stand out, stand out from the heap of mail that the people are receiving, or stand out, in the heap of email that they're receiving. So personalization can really help with that, and using influencers, it can also help. So a researcher in immunology is much more likely to open an email from a prominent researcher in immunology than an email from myself. And that point is, we call that breaking through the noise, and that's something that's relevant for your entire program. So through your combination of tactics, through the way that you create your messages, through the artwork that you create and how colorful your posters are, that's all about breaking through the noise, because the people that we're trying to reach are just like you. They're just like you. They're inundated with information from every direction. The radio and Facebook and billboards and bus stop ads. They're inundated just like you are. So your strategy, your priority as a marketer is to devise ways to break through the noise and to combine your tactics and leverage your message to try and get through. Okay. I'm going to skip this one, and I'm going to go to events. So three more tactics, and then I'll try and bring it all together before we close up. So events, you know what events are. So it's a huge pot of activity, but it's another really important arrow in your outreach quiver. So we're talking about events that may be in person, they may be online, they may be synchronous in real time, or they may be asynchronous, allowing for more people to participate from more time zones. They may be something that you host, they may be something that you co-host, they may be something that you just sponsor, or they may be something that you attend as a participant or as an exhibitor. And they may be small and intimate, like a faculty meeting, or they may be large and personal, like a library conference or a scientific meeting. As you kind of unpick this soup of events, I'd encourage you to consider, what is your marketing strategy? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? So it depends on whether you're raising awareness for your program, whether anyone has heard of it, or whether you're trying to convince people of what you have to offer. If you're just trying to raise awareness, if you're raising awareness, then splashing your brand, your name, as widely as possible can really help. So sponsoring a conference and having your logo on the screens, everywhere as someone walks through the Society for Neuroscience conference, for example. That's awareness raising. So not engaging, they're not at the decision point, you're just helping them to know that you're out there and you're available. As opposed to convincing the first people to lean into your project, or convincing your postdocs to venture away from their chosen publishing venues. That's different. That's much more interpersonal, where you really want to have the chance to have face-to-face conversations and connect people with influencers in order to get them to change their behavior. So I have to credit my colleagues at eLife for this. We went round and round the houses for years before we were able to articulate this difference in strategy. So if we were trying to reach a new discipline, had never heard of us before, then we needed to go to a smaller meeting where we could have FaceTime with more people and engage some of the more established researchers to break ground and gain traction for us, as opposed to something like the American Society for Cell Biology, where eLife was very well known because of our editor-in-chief. We just needed to have our logo up to remind people that we were there and we were awesome. 2 more tactics now. So again, really useful to just kind of audit all of these things in your head when you set out on your outreach program at the beginning. So if anyone has a better term than sales, please tell me, because I have, for all of my thinking, I've not been able to come up with something better. And I know that we don't mean sales, we're not doing sales. We're not selling anything, we're not putting on suits and it's not sales. But what it is person-to-person communication. So, in line with your outreach program, very deliberately reaching out to people to have conversations with them about what you have to offer and why it should matter to them. So this involves one-to-one meetings that could be online or they could be in person. So you know what I mean. I just need a better word for it. But because this is a deliberate component of your outreach program, and you are trying to get something out of this conversation, and you have very carefully, created your message and your framing statement to say, you should choose us instead of that other thing, you really need to manage your style and tone very carefully. So these are people that you work with on a daily basis. Take that tone, just speak to them as peers, as colleagues, and then weave you in your offering to the conversation. Don't over engineer it or overthink it. This is a community, and even though we're trying to achieve something specific, let's stay true to the community. This is really a powerful strategy to adopt in combination with other programs. So if you're attending a big meeting, then reaching out to some folks to ask them, hey, can we have a coffee and talk is a really great, powerful combination. Yeah, I think that's the example I wanted to bring to mind. I'll skip this again, just in the interest of time, but I want to emphasize the importance of knowing your audience, because if you're speaking to research librarians whose job it is to audit the security of different technologies that they're thinking about investing in, that's done one way, as opposed to convincing a university librarian that they should, redirect some funds into paying for open access publishing. You approach those conversations in very, very different ways because of who the people are and the nature of what you're asking them to do. Last tactic is advertising. So this is really, really powerful, and it doesn't have to be expensive. So advertising, in my mind, means in print. So full page ad in The Economist, which is where the money comes in, or advertising in the campus newsletter. There's a lot of avenues for online advertising through relevant websites, newsletters. Society newsletters do advertising, and search indexes like Google. You can advertise on Google for pennies, and you can keep an eye on it very closely so that so you don't overspend. And social media, you can also do very targeted advertising on Facebook and Twitter. It also involves outdoor advertising, so billboards and bus stops and that type of thing. It may sound far-fetched to you. It hasn't come up very often, but I will say that when eLife was sponsoring the Society for Neuroscience meeting, which is a monster meeting like ALA, 30,000 neuroscientists all going to the convention center in San Diego, which is in a set of 7 blocks. Advertising at those bus stops is really, really useful, and it was a lot cheaper than advertising inside the halls of the convention center. So it does come into play. And again, I'll credit my colleagues at eLife for that work of genius. And then finally, wearables. So, you know, t-shirts and stickers and buttons, we know that these are really important. We all, you know, we wear them. Open access buttons, orchid buttons, these are important for raising awareness amongst the target audiences that we're communicating with. And it wasn't until like this morning that I figured actually that's advertising, because I'm just going to jump ahead, bear with me. So having a sticker, you know, is free advertising. So folks are going to see this. They're going to be reminded of your offering, and it's a awareness raising strategy, as well as a reminding one, which I'll explain in just a moment. So this is also a really good example of social marketing to perpetuate public health and societal positive changes for societal benefit. So this is my daughter's iPhone case, and she's got a sticker for each of her vaccines, and because they gave us these stickers, they're encouraging people to get their vaccines. And because Mia has used this sticker, her peers are going to see it like, oh, I like Mia, she's got her vaccine, maybe I should get a vaccine too. So, so advertising strategies often come in three parts. So you can use them to inform your audience about your offering and just say, hi, we're here. So getting them to be familiar with your name if you get it out there. You can use it to persuade, to say, forgive me for a silly example, but, you know, inform, you know, here we have a new sports drink, here it is, you know, aren't we great? And then persuading, our sports drink has 95% less sodium than the next sports drink. So that, you know, that's a persuasive argument. And then reminding them, you know, don't forget about our sports drink over here. So that's a trajectory that's textbook for advertising, and useful to think about what you're going to put in your ad. You can use advertising to raise awareness by creating what we call an impression. So an impression is just how many eyes travel your ad. So when you talk to Google about buying advertising with them, they'll say, do you want impressions or do you want clicks? Clicks are different. Clicks mean actually clicking through. And you can generate, you can stimulate action, you can stimulate click by promoting an incentive. So, you know, click here for free access to the latest research. So that's advertising, and that is your full show. As you think about how to use tactics, as you think about how to use all of this information, I'd like to encourage you to consider a few things, 4 things specifically. So the first is a point that I believe I'm jumping up and down on here, which is, you know, what do you know about your audience? Where are they? How do you find them? Are they on Twitter? If not, don't spend your time on Twitter. Are they coming to the library? Yes, great. Speak to them there, set up a table. Where are they? So that's where you want to focus your attention, not elsewhere where you're just not going to get the impact that you're after. What tactic is going to help you to have the most impact? What do they need from you? Is it enough just to, you know, send out some tweets? Is that going to change their mind, or do they really need to hear from a peer who's doing, you know, who's already publishing their protocols and can advocate for the benefit to them? What is it that they need? How big is your budget? How much money have you got? If you have a lot, you could afford a stand at a relevant conference. If you haven't, then stickers or tweets type of thing. And then finally, how much time have you got to achieve your goal? So if you just have 4 weeks, then you might want to go for numbers and touching as many people as possible. If you've got 2 years, then you may work more slowly and nurture those influencers, nurture those you know, the most prestigious contacts and organize series of events and that type of thing. So so I better stop there. You'll have access to my slides. I'm repeating again a little bit of material from last time, and here I've offered 2 examples. So when eLife was trying to get submissions in stem cell biology in the early days, here are the tactics that we chose, and then for Force 11 when we were recruiting registrations to the meeting in Montreal. We didn't have any money, so, you know, these are the things that we did, and these are the things that we didn't do. And then finally, when you want to bring everything together, you've got, not just your tactics, which you can see here on the left-hand side, you've got a timeline for getting things done. And then you also have ways to measure the impact of each of your tactics, and then ways to improve those tactics if they're not measuring the way that you'd like them to do, if they're not achieving the impact that you'd like them to have. Again, I described this slide last time, and I'll just leave it with you for now. And so once again, the tactics here, the fourth bullet on the left is just one component of a broader outreach program. Maybe one day we can talk about the others if you're interested. But they're one thing that I hope you'll be able to take away and find use of, even just after one webinar. If there was anything I could leave you with, this is a flood of information. I realize if there was anything I could ask you to just please bear in mind, it's that targeting specific audiences, focusing on discrete communities is really important. People are going to listen to a message that's just for them much more closely than a message that doesn't speak to them. So an ecologist wants to hear, that you're speaking to them and you're not speaking to a neuroscientist. Get to know your audiences. It's really important to understand what they want to hear and what matters to them. This doesn't have to be a huge investment of time and energy. You can just talk to them. Just talk to them. And after you talk to 4 or 5 people, you start to hear patterns once you have your the segments right. So I encourage you to spend that time. It pays off in spades. Third, cast your offering in terms that resonate with them. So choose your audience, get to know their audience, and then speak in their language and present what you have in language that reflects what they need, not what you want to accomplish. And finally, there have been decades of time and money invested in refining marketing practices to get us to do things, to buy the next summer drink from Starbucks, you know what I mean. It goes on and on. There's no reason why we shouldn't borrow from those practices and use them to achieve the types of positive impacts that we have in mind through the work of everyone gathered here today on this call. So with that, I will stop. Thanks again for having me. I apologize for the flood of information. I hope it's useful. You'll have the slides, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take some time now for some questions. There is one in the Q&A if you have a look, Jennifer. And just what Jennifer mentioned, both this recording and the slides will be up on the RDA website. You can get there by going to events, and then there's webinars. There's a past webinars link, and that's where part 1 is. And part 2 will be in the, I guess it will be in the past too. So that's where you want to click on the link. So yeah. How about we start with that first question, and anybody else has questions, go ahead and add it into the Q&A.
Shall I read it out loud and then answer it, or can everybody? Sure. Okay. So Biri Zhu asks, says, we have many institutional accounts for social media outlets, and we often use them to communicate events and services, but it doesn't seem to catch too much attraction. How do I have any suggestions for how to leverage social media? Of course I do. Of course I do. So first is taking into account everything that we've talked about today, and understanding your audience and speaking in their language. So if you want the attention from students, say that. Say, students, here's this thing that we want you to notice, and then think about what motivates them. So if you want postdocs to attend an event, think about what motivates them. Pizza motivates postdocs. So postdocs, come to our event. There's pizza. So think about what they need and where they're coming from. And then also to grow your audience on social media, you might consider drawing attention from the others who have a following already. So if I want to gain attention for Dryad from the RDA community, then I will invoke their their handle in my tweet or in a comment to say, RDA, I think you may be interested in this, and then hopefully RDA will pick that up and retweet it, and then people will see where it came from, and then hopefully follow Dryad. So using language to signal to your audience that you want their attention, and then researching the handles for the communities that already have attention from the communities that you want, and letting them know that you'd like their attention as well.
There was one comment, Jen, in the chat from Stephanie Thompson. Since the pandemic, we have struggled to reach new academic staff at the university as induction events are not been happening. How would do you have any suggestions for Stephanie?
Help me to understand the situation a little bit more. So pandemic, people are slow. People haven't been on campus. Now they're slowly coming back to campus, and we're not collaborating well with the induction teams. Is that what I'm hearing?
Maybe, I don't know if Stephanie's still here. Let me look. Let's see.
So, I mean,
Yeah, Stephanie, do you want to, I can allow you to ask the question. Stephanie, can you answer Jennifer's question?
Hi, yeah. So we used to have monthly sessions where any new members of staff could come along, and we had sort of stands at those events. But those events haven't been happening because obviously we don't want to mix too much. So yeah, just trying to think of other ways to reach new starters.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think, I expected that it's campus specific, but what other messages are going to them, and how are they getting there? So if they're library staff, or HR teams in touch with them, could HR teams let them know that you've got an event coming up, a virtual event, and invite them to come there? So what communications are going to people, and are you able to piggyback on some of that? And in a normal environment, pre-pandemic environment, I can imagine that folks would be pretty resistant to having anything piggyback on whatever they're saying to new starters. But given the current context, I wonder if they might be a little bit more amenable.
Yes, then someone put a comment into the chat as well. Jennifer, thank you. We're running out of time. If you have any other questions, you can drop them in the chat and I'll copy them before I say goodbye. I do want to share my screen. I have a little bit of housekeeping, and let's see. Share my screen, excuse me. Okay, so I wanted to give you some information about the upcoming plenary for RDA. So our next plenary is being held during International Data Week on June 20th through the 23rd in Seoul, South Korea. It's currently scheduled as a hybrid meeting, and it has limited available seats in person. So you want to go to the RDA website and read up on that. Registration is open. I'm not sure yet whether in person is open, but have a look there. We do have some more webinars coming up in our group. Are you guys seeing my screen? Somebody say yes.
Not at the moment, no.
Oh, you're not? Are you seeing my, okay, let's see.
You can see your video, but it doesn't look like you're screen sharing.
It's so weird, it says I am. Screen share. Are you, did you unscreen share? Oh boy.
I did, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulty, and it says it's sharing and it's not. So I'm going to have to tell you. So our upcoming webinars are, we have one in May, June, July, every single month. There'll be different groups: persistent identifiers of instruments working group, professionalizing data stewardship interest group, exposing data management plans, cure fair working group, research metadata schemas working group, and DMP common standards. And I wish you could see my screens because I'm so excited to announce that we just launched our first RDA podcast called Data Streams. And if you go to the RDA website at rdaalliance.org/podcast, you'll see the very first podcast is the journey of working groups journey. And our are featuring the Data Citation Working Group, and our first recording is with Mark Parsons and Andreas Rauber. Please take a look. And the next ones upcoming will be Sensitive Data, Interest Group, National PID Strategies, Data Granularity, Data Repository Attributes. We'll be meeting with all of those chairs. You'll, in the next couple of weeks, we will be posted on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, our RDA YouTube channel. So you have plenty of ways of joining. Thanks, Jennifer. I want to thank you. I want to thank Rebecca for helping behind the scenes. Lena Harper from Digital Research Alliance Canada for arranging the French translation services, our interpreters, Yanitza Cornano, and to the audience for participating. Thank you. I do have a slide with a few, I don't know why it's not showing up. I apologize. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a great day.